In the winter of 1903, on the high plains of northern Montana, Ingrid Sahlberg is working. She is doing something that makes every sensible person within 3 miles stop and stare. She is not chopping firewood, though her woodpile is pitifully low and her cabin drafty. She is out in the frozen field, pushing stakes into the iron ground at strange angles, measuring distances with rope. She mutters numbers to herself in Norwegian and English. The stakes she drives form a shape that no decent cabin in Chouteau County has ever taken. 8 sides, a perfect octagon scratched out in the snow like a geometry book. Her nearest neighbor, broad-shouldered Heinrich Brauer, leans on his fence post and watches for a long time. He cups his hands and hollers, "Ingrid, you building a hen house or a dance hall?" His wife Marta laughs from the porch. Their hired man laughs too, leaning against the woodpile. Ingrid does not look up. She focuses only on the iron ground, driving the next stake. Her daughter Astrid watches from the doorway of the failing cabin with dark, serious eyes. Ingrid has $42 in a crockery jar and a team of horses. Getting old, the neighbors call her the Norwegian widow, waiting for her to fail and go back. She does not intend to fail, and she does not intend to go back, but first she needs to build something that has never been built on these plains. The last man who wintered poorly in this county died, and Ingrid found him herself in 1898. 26-year-old Ingrid arrived from Norway carrying wool, blankets, a cast iron pot, and ancestral wisdom. She married Lars Sahlberg. During the voyage, a quiet man with skilled hands but a dangerously frail chest. In 1899, they filed their claim near Havre, breaking the stubborn sod. Through a long, brutal summer together, they built the log cabin, which now lists eastward with crumbling chinking and a whistling window. Lars survived 2 winters, but the third brought a December cold that pressed down like a heavy boot. Lars's chest finally failed him at 34 in March. Ingrid buried him when the ground finally softened, alone with Astrid. Since his death, Ingrid manages 480 acres of prairie and a failing cabin. A $320 mortgage looms due in 18 months unless she can prove the farm's profitability. With 40 sheep and 14 cattle, survival depends entirely on the mercy of a mild Montana winter. The last 2 winters had not been mild, leaving the homestead scarred by the relentless cold. In 1902, Ingrid spent $37 precious on coal, yet the woodpile remained dangerously low. Every February morning she found solid ice in the water bucket. As the fire died out, she wrapped Astrid in every blanket, holding her daughter through the coldest, most silent hours. Astrid never complained, and her silent endurance was what frightened Ingrid the most of all. She could not survive another winter here. The arithmetic of survival simply did not add up. Another bad winter meant fuel costs she couldn't afford, or the death of her child. Failure meant foreclosure in the spring, and losing everything that Lars had died to build. She needed to build something new, something the Montana cold could never hope to touch. She remembered her grandfather, old Berger, who lived 81 years in a house of stone. His home was dug into a Norwegian hillside built of earth and ancient sturdy sod. That house stayed 50 degrees in January without fire, fueled by the earth's own deep bones. Berger's walls were 3 feet thick and curved, keeping the heat in, and secrets safe. He taught her that corners let the cold in while curves held the life inside. For 2 months, Ingrid sketched the octagon in her dirt floor before driving the first stakes. 8 sides meant no true corners, allowing the powerful Montana wind to deflect and split around her. Prevailing northwest winds often top 60 miles per hour, but this shape angles against the hammering force. She had seen this in nature. Round boulders shedding water while ice squared off behind deadfall. She needed the structure half underground, dug 4 feet deep with earth bermed against the walls. Only 1 foot of wall would be exposed, leaving the rest protected by the earth's insulation. Deep earth holds a constant temperature of 48 degrees, even in the most lethal Montana cold. Lacking a thermometer, she relied on her grandfather's word and the memory of his warm floors. With nothing left to lose, Ingrid possessed the absolute confidence of a woman driven by survival. She begins digging on the 14th of October. 1903. The ground is not yet fully frozen. Mornings bite hard enough to leave ice in the water trough, but she has her plan. She has spades, a mattock, a saw, a drill, and lumber from the failing outbuilding. Over the preceding 2 months, she had also been hauling heavy stone from the creek. The creek is lined with flat-sided sandstone slabs some 3 inches thick and 2 feet across. Through August and September, she loaded stones onto the wagon whenever she wasn't tending animals. Her neighbors watched, including Helen McFarland, the proper authority on what was decent. Helen stopped her buggy. September, asking Ingrid, "What are you collecting all those rocks for?" Building, Ingrid had said, as Helen warned her she would break her back and should pay someone. "I have no one to pay," Ingrid replied, while Helen drove on, intending to tell the story now. In October, Ingrid is digging. She moves an enormous amount of earth alone for the octagon. She hauls earth to the north and west, building the berm to shield the structure's exterior. She works from first light until dark, eating whatever Astrid manages to heat on the stove. By week's end, her hands bleed. She wraps them in flour sack strips and keeps digging. Day 9 brings a setback. She strikes a shelf of shale 18 inches below the surface. The mattock rings like an anvil, sparks flying in the 17-degree dark, her breath frozen. Chipping through it for 2 days, she loses 4 days total. She cannot lose 4 days working by lantern light. While Astrid sleeps, she hears coyotes calling on the dark plain. The lantern throws light, but no warmth for her fingers in the freezing midnight air. Heinrich Brauer rides over, warning her that a dug structure might not qualify as a dwelling. Ingrid stares at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a calculated, desperate resolve. "It is not a dwelling," she says carefully. "It is a barn for the sheep." Brauer rides away, looking uncertain, leaving Ingrid to return to her grueling solitary labor. Finally reaching the proper depth, she leaves the floor as compacted earth to breathe warmth. This floor seeps 48-degree ground temperature all winter, a fuel-free warmth from the earth's bones. She builds double walls, starting with a 14-inch outer layer of stone and stretched mortar. She leaves a 4-inch air gap before constructing an inner wall of tightly packed cordwood. The inner wall consists of 8-inch split pine rounds, creating a thick insulating timber barrier. The dead air space between the 2 walls is the most vital feature of the structure. Still air creates a barrier the cold struggles to cross. Unlike the moving lethal prairie wind, total wall thickness is 26 inches, dwarfing the 8-inch logs of their failing drafty cabin. She fills the north and west air gaps with packed raw wool fleece from summer fences. The heavy smell of lanolin fills the air, an unglamorous but effective insulation for the winter. By late October, the rising walls turn neighborly curiosity into active, bewildered skepticism and judgment. Old Pete Danner, a veteran of 17 winters, watches with an expression of genuine bewilderment. Looking down from his horse, he mutters, "You gone and put your barn in a hole? The ground is warmer than the air," Ingrid tells him. Standing in the pit's center, ground freezes solid. Ingrid 4 feet down, or 40. It freezes. Pete Danner insists, "Not in the deep," she says. "Come back in February, I will show you." Pete warns about Dakota pigs lost to moisture, claiming things sweat underground and rot animals. Ingrid considered moisture-cutting ventilation channels into opposing walls fitted with hand-carved louver boards. Cold, dry air enters, low, warm, moist air exits. High, a gentle convection handle moisture. Pete tips his hat politely and rides away, leaving her to her strange subterranean work. Young Will Carver pulls his horse up, watching with the unearned confidence of the arrogant. "Ma'am," he calls out, "you're buildin' yourself a tomb down there when that roof caves in or the damp takes the sheep. Don't say we didn't warn ye." He tips his hat and rides on without waiting for a reply. The truest sign of certainty. Helen McFarland arrives in early November, bringing a loaf of bread and a great deal of advice. "The roof will collapse under snow." "Wait," Helen announces, looking at the octagon roof's framing. "No one builds octagon barns in Montana." Ingrid agrees. "That is perhaps why the barns here freeze 100. Helen warns that Ingrid will lose her animals and land, urging her to sell and move. "Thank you for the bread, Helen." Ingrid dismisses the advice, returning her focus to the work. Marta Brauer brings Astrid knitted mittens, watching Ingrid's labor with a deeply troubled expression. "My Heinrich says you will lose the animals to dampness," Marta says, relaying her husband's doubt. "Has he seen one?" Ingrid asks, her tone calm but challenging the neighbor's lack of experience. Marta admits that neither Heinrich nor anyone else has actually seen an underground barn before. Neither has anyone else here. Ingrid says that is not the same as it not working. By mid-November, Ingrid has lost 12 pounds, her right shoulder aching constantly from the stonework, her hands have developed thick calluses, and 2 fingernails have turned black from the stone hammer. She works from dark till dark, then calculates roof pitch by the cabin stove with Astrid. She has only $11 left in the crockery jar. Her financial margin nearly gone. The octagonal roof requires 8 principal rafters meeting at a central peak, her most complex challenge, yet she has never built a roof. Lars built the cabin roof with help. Years ago, she studies the cabin roof from inside, understanding the geometry through logic before building hers. She makes one rafter too short on the third panel, costing her half a day and $3. The roof pitch is steep, 10 inches of rise for every 12 inches. To shed the coming heavy snow, this steepness prevents snow accumulation, while the octagon shape splits the wind load from 8 different angles. She covers the framing with boards, then 2 layers of tar paper sealing the structure against the elements. Finally, she lays thick sod slabs grass side down like shingles, letting the roots knit together over time. The sod adds weight but provides insulation comparable to 6 inches of wood. Echoing Berger's teachings, the frosted turf smell confirms something ancestral as she lays each piece in the biting air. She finishes on the 14th of November as the temperature drops to 12 degrees above zero. Ingrid leads 40 sheep with oily wool fleeces into the new warm interior of the octagon barn. She brings in 3 vulnerable cattle, leaving the sturdier animals in the existing drafty log barn. She hangs a heavy wool blanket over the doorway, a temporary barrier against the encroaching winter inside the octagon barn. With the animals settled and the lantern hung, it is 44 degrees outside. The temperature has already fallen through 12 degrees and is heading lower into the night. Ingrid breathes in the smell of wool, pine, and earth, finally allowing herself to feel hope. Astrid is asleep in the cabin while hard, brilliant stars signal a serious approaching northern cold. Ingrid reads the sky, a stillness before weight, a continent of cold air pressing from the north. She checks her ventilation louvers and banks the small iron stove for backup moisture management. She has 3 weeks of wood but expects to need only 1 if the design holds. She walks back to the cabin, eats cold porridge standing up, and finally goes to bed. 3 miles north, Pete Danner's cattle huddle in a standard wood frame barn. Pete, confident in his traditional methods. 2 miles east, Helen McFarland has secured her boarding house with plenty of coal, certain of another safe winter. But resources, as Ingrid's grandfather said, are not the same as wisdom about the lethal creeping Montana cold. The storm begins Saturday afternoon on the 21st of November, arriving from the northwest with sudden terrifying speed. The temperature drops 15 degrees in 45 minutes as 50-mile-an-hour winds arrive before the first flakes of snow. When the snow finally comes, it arrives sideways, driven by the horizontal force of a true Montana blizzard. By nightfall, the wind is clocking between 50 and 65 miles per hour, gusting even higher. The temperature is -11. Fine, dry snow blows through cracks in the walls like smoke. By midnight, it is -23. By Sunday morning, the temperature hits -37 degrees and still it falls. A relentless curtain of white burying the high plains of northern Montana. By dawn Monday, the temperature drops past -40, hitting a lethal -58 degrees. Wind chill pushes the cold past 70 below zero, a category of suffering beyond mere winter. Exposed skin freezes in minutes, cattle die. A man caught in the open does not return. The old-timers call it a killer storm because they have seen it kill before. Inside Pete Danner's board-end batten barn, the temperature falls to -3. Cattle suffer, their ears turning white. Pete feeds the stove, losing a heifer calf to the crushing cold. By 3 in the morning, exhaustion takes hold as Pete loses 2 sheep, realizing his traditional methods are failing against the storm. Helen McFarland's boarding house holds, yet the water pipes on the north wall freeze solid. By Sunday evening, the burst pipes represent a $60 loss, a steep price for the security she thought she bought. Heinrich Brauer's substantial barn drops to 8 below zero, claiming the life of a valuable draft horse. Brauer will remember this loss forever, a silent grief etched into his established sensible life, despite the lethal -58 degree Temperatures outside Ingrid Solberg's octagon barn remains warm and does not freeze at the coldest point, with horizontal snow hammering the octagon. The barn's interior holds steady at 11 degrees. Above zero, 11 degrees above zero, inside a lethal -58 degrees, outside a terrifying gap between life and frozen death. Wind chill pushes past 70 below, but inside those 26-inch walls hold a life-saving 47-degree temperature difference, 47 degrees warmer inside than the coldest air outside. The one number that means survival for her and her animals. The mechanisms are simple physics. 4 feet of earth conducting its constant 48-degree warmth through the stones. The 3-foot earthen berm acts as a massive buffer, a wall of earth the killing cold cannot penetrate. The double wall with its dead air gap resists the movement of heat with a tenacity single wall construction cannot match. The steep sod roof, 18 inches of earth and root, holds interior warmth like a lid on a pot. The octagonal shape deflects the 55-mile-an-hour wind at oblique angles, splitting the force rather than catching it. Ingrid's barn has no 90-degree junctions where wind load concentrates and heat bleeds out into the lethal cold. Each corner is a 135-degree angle, allowing the lethal Montana wind to go around rather than through. The sheep generate the warmth of their own bodies, 40 small furnaces whose heat the walls faithfully retain. Ingrid sits with the animals through Monday night, unable to sleep in the freezing cabin while this sanctuary holds. She feeds the small stove its hourly stick of wood, listening to the storm scream at her walls. At 3 in the morning, Heinrich Brauer appears at the door, his face white with frost and ice. He stares at the resting sheep while his breath forms a long, thick cloud between them. In silence, Heinrich speaks with all certainty removed. God in heaven, Ingrid, it is warm in here. Ingrid holds up the dairy thermometer she has been reading. Heinrich squints, his eyes going wide. 11 degrees, Ingrid says. Above zero. Heinrich stands silent, looking at the earthen walls and roof. My horse is dead, Heinrich finally admits, his voice heavy with a particular quality of silenced grief. I know, she says. I am sorry, Heinrich. He adds, my barn is 8 below. He stands there, the blizzard howling at his back as something shifts. A load-bearing certainty finally gives way. He looks at the walls, then at her. You will tell me how you built this, he says. His voice is that of a man who knows he was wrong and has decided to learn. Come inside, Ingrid says. I will tell you now. She gestures toward the warmth of the barn. The storm breaks on the 23rd. The sky turns a still pale blue as the temperature rises slowly. Ingrid opens the barn door at first light and looks out at a world completely remade. In white drifts 6 feet deep fill the lane, burying the cabin's north side and the sheep pen gate. The octagon barn sits in a clear pocket. Its south and east walls scoured bare by the wind. Drifts pile only on the west and north sides, exactly where Ingrid intended them for insulation. Every one of the 40 sheep is alive. Ingrid counts them, twice her relief. Absolute. The 3 cattle she had housed inside are all alive, in good condition and unharmed. Despite being uneasy in the morning light, she opens the ventilation louvers, letting cold, fresh air push out the accumulated warmth and moisture from the long storm. Heinrich Brauer returns with Mark, examining the barn's berm, stone walls, and octagonal angles with the care of a potential buyer. Pete Danner arrives on foot through deep drifts, a man recalculating his world after losing a calf and 2 sheep inside. Pete reads the 46-degree thermometer, then checks his own outside at -7, stunned by the massive temperature gap. By gum, Pete says, finally acknowledging the 53-degree difference that Ingrid's wisdom and labor carved out of the Montana winter. Helen McFarland returns after 2 days, bringing bread and admitting $60 in water pipe damages. Come in, Ingrid says. I will show you. She welcomes Helen to learn the barn's secrets. Young Will Carver rides past the barn in silence, his previous arrogant mockery replaced by admission. Ingrid explains double wall construction and ground depth mathematics to neighbors Pete Danner and Heinrich Brauer. She draws the octagon in the snow, explaining how the shape deflects the lethal Montana wind. Ingrid explains the sod roof and the convection logic. Cold air and low warm air out. None of it is magic, it is physics, a problem of logic rather than mere endurance. Endurance is for when structures fail. Physics is what you need so that they do not. In the Long quiet of January, the worst of winter, had finally passed its peak. Ingrid talks to Astrid by the stove about her grandfather Birger and his Norwegian hillside house. Birger died knowing a truth that Ingrid has now built on the high Montana plains. She teaches Astrid. Cold is not the enemy. The failure to think is the enemy. Cold is only a condition like wind or stone. Everything can be understood and answered. 7-year-old Astrid understood this in the wordless way that children who have survived do. Ingrid explains that Lars died in a cabin that should not have been built that way. That is not anyone's fault. People build what they know. Tragedy is refusing to learn. Ingrid looks at the bank mortgage note from Haver beside the crockery jar, now holding $26. The ewes wintered in extraordinary condition, fat and healthy, promising a strong and successful spring lambing season. She built through Montana's worst with $42, aging horses and knowledge that crossed an ocean. Old knowledge of earth and physics travels and waits, proving its worth whenever the country changes. The octagon barn stood for 31 years, sheltering animals through 3 more killing winters without loss. When Astrid Solberg was grown, she built her own house with 8 sides, double walls, and a sod roof she built into the ground where the warmth never stops, because she understood the secret of the earth. If you have sat shivering while the cold finds every crack, you understand why she built that way. The lesson was about the courage to draw a strange shape in the snow and trust what you carry. It was about the courage to build while others laugh, trusting your own knowledge to survive the winter.